The Great Pyramid is a testament to human ingenuity. Both outside and in, the builders of the pyramid followed a master architectural plan and executed it to perfection. Because more than 4,500 years later, the structure still stands. It's not a crumbling ruin. Thousands of tourists enter each year, and we can't wait to feast our eyes on the King's Chamber, the beating heart of the Great Pyramid. But to get to this magnificent granite-lined room, each visitor must take the majestic path through the Grand Gallery. Our eyes are drawn to the magnificent corbelled walls and ceiling. The sheer height of the Grand Gallery reflects the grandeur of the greatest structure of the ancient world, filling us with anticipation and wonder. But the Grand Gallery is as mysterious a feature as any other part of the Great Pyramid. It could be an ancient wonder in its own right. There are things we all walk past, things we don't even see for looking, and so we don't question. Well, it's time to shine a light on this passageway, to reveal the secrets of the Grand Gallery, and to discuss the ideas of an architect who believes he's solved the mystery. Hello everybody, and welcome to Ancient Architects. Please subscribe to the channel for regular content on ancient architecture, as well as all of the latest news from the world of archaeology. The Grand Gallery is probably the most enigmatic feature of the Great Pyramid. When I entered for the first time in September last year, it gave me genuine goosebumps. I remember the experience so well, and pictures and video footage will never give you a true sense of what it's like inside. I remember thinking it was narrower than I imagined, but also much longer than I thought it was. The height of the structure was impressive. It's a bold design in the heart of the world's most impressive ancient structure, but it almost felt, well, unnecessary, almost too extravagant for the Great Pyramid, a gamble that the architect did not need to take. We've seen the corbelled chambers in Snefru's pyramids, but nothing as long as this, and previous examples were also not built on an incline. But there are clues inside that tell us there was more to the Grand Gallery than what meets the eye today. Evidence in the stones that show us that this room is not in its complete form. Mysteries that need to be solved. For example, there is a long groove halfway up the eastern and western walls. There are sockets and niches cut into the ramps and side walls, and there are features that have been hidden by modern restoration work. It's a space that has puzzled pyramid enthusiasts like me for a long time, but one man, and friend of the channel, architect Jean-Pierre believes he can explain it all. But before we get to his explanation, let's take a closer look at the finer details of the Grand Gallery. We enter the Grand Gallery on its northern side from the ascending passageway. The floor of this passageway extends into the gallery like this, and we can see from this diagram from Charles Piazzi Smythe that the upper edge of this step is broken and worn. Where the ascending passageway ends, the top of the passage is level with the top of the horizontal passageway directly opposite, so you'd think the bottom edge of the ascending passageway would also be level with the floor of the horizontal passage, like this. But it's not, and so this step is clearly a purposeful addition, a planned architectural feature, and something that any hypothesis really needs to account for. After the step, we're greeted by this view, with the central section of the Grand Gallery leading directly into the horizontal passage, and this leads directly on to the Queen's Chamber. Some believe there was a bridge or platform that covered this area, supported by crossbeams that were inserted into these sockets on the side walls, meaning the Queen's Chamber was once hidden from view, and the Grand Gallery joined up with the ascending passageway below. The central part of the Grand Gallery has a width of 2 cubits, the same as the width of the horizontal passageway below. On the eastern and western sides there are 2 ramps or benches, and as you can see these features are higher. They each have a width of 1 cubit, making the entire width of the Grand Gallery around 4 cubits. On both the eastern and western ramps, there are 27 holes or slots on the floor, and these are set against the sidewalls. Directly behind and extending above 25 of these holes, there are niches that have been cut into the walls. The niches have been infilled with stones, and these stones have grooves running across them, best shown in this picture from the early 1900s. The ceiling of the Grand Gallery is 2 cubits wide, and so the eastern and western walls gently close in, and this is thanks to a series of 7 corbels. Not many people are aware, but the northern and southern walls are also corbelled. The south wall has 7 corbels, but the north wall only has 6. Running along the length of the eastern and western walls of the Grand Gallery is this groove, and this is located on the face of the 3rd corbel. It's quite rough in appearance, just 13 cm above the 3rd corbel's lower edge, and it measures 15 cm high and is just over 2 cm in depth. The upper edge of this groove is often badly defined and chipped away, but the lower edge is far better, although missing in several places, and this is due to the breakage of the corbel. The lower edge of this groove is 4.37 metres from the floor, meaning it's roughly halfway up the Grand Gallery walls, but you have to ask yourself, why is it there? And why is the upper edge of this groove so badly damaged? Where these grooves are positioned on the wall, the width of the Grand Gallery is 1.65 metres. On my visit in September last year, as I reached the upper southern end of the Grand Gallery, I remember thinking just how high the Great Step was, but not many people know that this step has been drastically repaired in modern times. This photo that was taken in the early 20th century by the Edgar brothers shows just how irregular this step once looked. I have to say, repairing the step and giving it a right-angled edge really was a big mistake by Egyptian authorities, because we don't know if this so-called damage was on purpose or not. Was it meant to be this shape on purpose? The Great Step is positioned on the east-west axis of the pyramid, directly above the apex of the Queen's Chamber. The step is 4 cubits wide and extends back for 3 cubits, and here's where we find the entrance to the antechamber and granite portcullises. We can see there is more damage above the entrance, and also on the western side. As we've seen, the benches of the Grand Gallery are lined with slots on the floor, and 2 more can be found on the southern edge of the platform after the Great Step, meaning there are in fact 28 in total on each side of the gallery. When you're stood on the Great Step, if you look up on the eastern wall, you can see an opening to a tunnel, and this leads to the first relieving chamber above the King's Chamber. Another thing to note, at the lower northern end of the Grand Gallery, on the floor is the opening to the well shaft, and this is located against the wall on the western side. Today, this opening is covered up, but you can see it better in these pictures by the Edgar brothers. As we can see, between the opening to the well and the northern wall of the Grand Gallery, the lowest portion of the western ramp has broken away. The final thing to mention is the length of the Grand Gallery, and if we use the ramps, which extend all the way to the northern wall, the gallery is 88 cubits in length, which is 1/5 of the pyramid's base length. You could write a long and detailed analysis of the finer details, anomalies and architectural features of the Grand Gallery, and for those that want to know more, Keith Hamilton has done just that and published the information in his Great Pyramid Layman's Guide Part 1, and I've left links in the description below. Because for anyone that wishes to put forward a brand new hypothesis for the Grand Gallery, such details must be understood, addressed and considered. For example, The slots we can see in the benches are in fact arranged in a pattern. They alternate between long and short varieties, and the gaps between the slots are not always consistent. I think everything we see in the Grand Gallery was done for a reason, following a plan, and anyone attempting to explain the Grand Gallery must explain every feature we see. And French architect Jean-Pierre Houdin is the only person I've come across so far in all my years of research who has given a realistic explanation for why the Grand Gallery was built, how it was used, and why it has these slots and grooves cut into the stonework. He believes the Grand Gallery was used in the construction of the Great Pyramid, specifically to get the enormous granite blocks into the heart of the structure. If these blocks were simply pulled up a ramp with a 7% incline, you would need 600 men to just pull one 60-ton block into position. Coordinating this many people would be a near impossible task, and the difficulty of this work is somewhat unrealistic. Houdin's answer to this problem is of course the Grand Gallery. In his view, it's the central key part of a grand system of counterweights that would have made the job possible with just 100 men, to move the enormous granite blocks. So let's explain how it works. He has a staging area on the southern side of the Great Pyramid construction site, and in the first instance, this is where the granite blocks were brought to. The staging area is located at 43 metres above the ground, and during construction it rose to 58 metres. And if we look at the southern side of the Great Pyramid today, we can see a very specific area of damage, and this is located at the height of Houdin's staging area, telling us that something unusual is going on at this location, possibly the filling in of this area at a later date. The granite blocks would be lifted up high by being connected to a counterweight system that was housed in the Grand Gallery. On the raised benches either side of the Grand Gallery, there would be wooden rollers, and on these rollers was a trolley, and this trolley would hold heavy blocks of granite for the counterweight system. Of course, for this video I'm going to simplify all the details, but the trolley would be attached to ropes, and these were connected to the block that was ready to be lifted on the staging platform. Of course, human labour was still needed, but thanks to the Grand Gallery, the number of people is only around 100. But what about the slots on the edges of the benches? Well, Houdin believes that wooden beams were added to keep the rollers in position, to stop them slipping and sliding. These beams could have also had grooves on their upper edges, and this would have acted as a braking system, if the hefty dead weight needed to be stopped. The niches in the walls behind each slot could simply be extra anchoring points for the wooden side rails, to give the wooden structure more strength. Houdin even explains the groove halfway up the eastern and western walls. He says that wooden planks were inserted into them, and the trolley would slide along these beams, as well as on the rollers below, giving the counterweight system extra support. For the ancient Egyptians, wood was scarce and precious, so once the system went out of use, this wood would have been taken out, hence the roughly chiselled upper edge of the groove we see today. But is there any more physical evidence for his idea? Well, we can see a number of linear scratches on the inside faces of the benches, explained by Houdin by the constant movement of the contraption, possibly shaking as it moved up and down the Grand Gallery. There is also what looks like two stripes of discoloration, which Bob Breyer called racing stripes, and this could be from grease or some kind of lubricant that was used to ensure the system worked efficiently and minimise friction. Houdin's model does give an all-encompassing explanation for the features we see in the Grand Gallery, including the worn V-shaped northern edge of the Great Step, because to Houdin this is not a step. The rock has this specific shape because it was to guide a rope that was connected to a cylindrical ballast stone, and this was connected to the rollers to maintain the stability of the counterweight trolley. This weight would have hung down into the ascending passageway. So, the Great Step was meant to have a V-shape, and looking at this picture, and the central part does look to be rounded. It looks like this to facilitate the sliding of a rope, as shown in this reconstruction. If proven correct, the Egyptian authorities have not restored the Great Step by creating this right-angled northern edge with the addition of cement. They have in fact defaced a key part of the monument, and have therefore hidden its true history, in effect hindering any new research into the functionality of the Great Pyramid. On leaving the ascending passageway, you can step up onto the eastern ramp and then head up the Grand Gallery, or you can go straight ahead into the horizontal passageway, and this of course leads to the Queen's Chamber. This junction means there is a gap in the floor at the northern end of the Grand Gallery. Because the counterweight system only uses the side ramps of the gallery, you technically don't need to bridge this gap to make it function. But evidence certainly suggests that at some time this area was bridged, because it would explain the form of this step and also this lowered area of the Grand Gallery floor. Together they pretty much show the position of a false floor. It's believed that this platform was supported by crossbeams because we can see some clear and distinct holes in the inner walls of the ramp. The holes seem to be arranged in pairs, opposite each other, and one side is deeper than the other, and I assume this was to allow the fitting of a beam. Looking at the holes in cross-section, and they all vary in size, and most of their upper edges are sloping, and this would be to line up with the slope of the gallery. This is yet more evidence a sloping floor of some kind was added, and this is the design that Houdin once presented for the bridge. He doesn't just simply have wooden beams going into the holes, but an entire wooden structure or framework is built, anchored into position by the holes, and this lines up with the opening to the ascending passageway, and also the floor of the gallery. But why is this even necessary? Well, 3 granite plugging stones today block the northern end of the ascending passageway, and most agree that they were slid down the passage from the Grand Gallery. But where did the blocks come from? Well, the counterweight trolley needed to have substantial weight to help it lift the large granite blocks into position, and so what would be better than blocks of granite? Yes, you probably guessed it, but the granite blocks that were used in the counterweight contraption could well be the plug blocks we see in the ascending passageway today. When the counterweight system was no longer required, when its job was fulfilled, it would be placed at the northern end of the Grand Gallery, and then, one by one, the granite plugs were released, sliding down the bridged area that was built into the gallery, and then into the ascending passageway below. Of course, you may be wondering about access, how the people left inside would get out, and what happens to the wooden contraption. We have to note that inside Houdin's model, there are in fact more passages and chambers in the Great Pyramid, and these are still yet to be discovered. So before the pyramid was finished, according to Houdin, people did have other ways in and out of the pyramid. And we also have the well shaft, which, if original, is another exit from the bottom of the Grand Gallery. Furthermore, the 3 granite plugs could have been dropped by the counterweight system and then held up inside the Grand Gallery whilst the counterweight contraption was dismantled. They could have remained there until the very end, with workmen releasing them and then leaving through the well shaft. With everything I've read about the Grand Gallery, all the ideas for its purpose and function, all of the explanations for the slots, niches, grooves and anomalies, I have to say the ideas by Jean-Pierre Houdin are the best. There is of course so much more detail I could go into, and more things that need thinking about and explaining. For example, why were stones inserted into the niches that were cut into the walls? Well, maybe this was a way to finish the Grand Gallery after the counterweight mechanism was decommissioned, i.e. the wooden guide rails were removed and the wall niches were filled with stones. But what about the slots in the floor? Why were they not filled in? And what are these grooves running across the filler stones? Well, interestingly, these grooves line up with the top of the Great Step, so maybe a new wooden floor was laid over the Grand Gallery and Great Step, again to finish the gallery, into one that could have a ceremonial use. More work on this idea is required. But although everything I've mentioned explains how the Grand Gallery functioned, and the reason it was built the way it was, I do need to mention that Houdin's explanation for the construction of the Great Pyramid has adapted in recent years. Yes, since the Scan Pyramids project found the Big Void in 2017, Houdin has updated his model, because it now looks like there are in fact two Grand Galleries stacked on top of each other. Although the model he presented is now more complicated, to Houdin the Big Void was in fact a very helpful discovery, and he believes that this was for the highest granite blocks of the relieving chambers. To Houdin, both the Grand Gallery and the Big Void are features of the Great Pyramid related to construction, and specifically to raise the large granite stones of the King's Chamber and relieving chambers into position. When we finally get to see inside the Big Void, if it does indeed have a similar form to the Grand Gallery, and if we also see these slots and grooves, well, this would be tremendous support for Houdin's functional hypothesis of this amazing space. To learn more about Houdin's work, I've left some links in the description below, and his latest papers are available as free downloads. So, that is, in my opinion, the best explanation for the Grand Gallery, but this doesn't mean the work is done. This area of the Grand Gallery does need more attention, as do the niches in the walls, their infill stones and the grooves running across them. Furthermore, if the new north face corridor did once extend all the way into the heart of the Great Pyramid on a straight horizontal path, it would line up with the bottom of the Grand Gallery. So is there any evidence to say the two are linked? And was the Grand Gallery purely functional, or was it transformed into a ceremonial space as well? For me, this will be my ongoing research as I continue to try and unravel all of the mysteries of the Great Pyramid. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Ancient Architects. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel, please like the video, and please leave a comment below. Thank you very much.